When I was younger, me and my childhood best friend Dominique used to practice telling off imaginary strangers in the mirror who dare try to harm me and my sister. You want to harm my sister? You got to get through me. That's right, and you don't want this. Now, we were small, but we were mighty. And in so many ways, we were the same. But not for long, because you see, Dominique and I grew up under very different circumstances and with very different support. So she began to walk with the rhythm of the streets that raised her. Her boisterous laughter became makeup to cover the scars that decorate her brown skin. And her presence in my life became just as special as it was sporadic. And so when I was in college, Dominique was in prison. While I was writing papers theorizing about racial trauma and analyzing the impacts of structural racism, Dominique was sending me letters from prison detailing the trauma and abuse that led her there. And as someone who was myself attaining some level of upward mobility via my Wellesley College degree, I learned a great deal about what it means to navigate these different worlds, although I often wondered how she would be received in some of the other spaces that I occupy. For instance, I think of my work in the DEI sector. One day, fairly new into my DEI journey, I'm recording an interview with someone whom I admire from the disability justice sector with a couple of my colleagues observing nearby. Shortly after the interview is done, one of my colleagues comes out and says, I think we need to do that over. Did anyone else just catch the harm that just occurred? Now, no one said anything, but I'm immediately freaking out. I'm replaying the tape back in my head. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what could I have said that was so harmful? The statement that gets repeated back is something along the lines of, disability has a negative connotation within society, but the work that you're doing is helping to change that. Now I'm freaking out even more because I feel like I've become the evil ableist in the room and I don't know how or why, and I definitely don't want that. So I repeat back, I say, I can't say disability has a negative connotation. And I'm immediately met with the, why the heck don't you know this stares? Now this reaction makes my heart sink into my chest. And the tension in the room feels so thick, it was like I said something about somebody's mama. Now, truthfully, even after all this went down, I really still didn't see what the issue was, and neither did any of my friends who I shared the story with, all of whom would be considered lower middle class. But after I follow up with my colleague about it, I learned that I use the term negative connotation interchangeably with perception, when in actuality, it's the equivalent of saying that the subject itself is inherently negative. And if you are still confused, you are not alone. Now, this was incredibly disheartening for me, having unintentionally caused someone harm. But what was just as disheartening was how easy it was for me to do so, simply for not having the right language, or by extension, the right class, or the right social capital, as some academics would call it. And I began to wonder how often my own class background would become a liability as I try to navigate this field for creating social change. See, this isn't the first time I felt shame for not knowing something. In fact, that was a large part of my college career. Several years of deep depression, clinging to survival, while trying to navigate an elitist culture where my inner city black girlness was not celebrated, let alone welcome, where my confidence was constantly shaken, and my intellect constantly called into question. Now, this moment triggered those feelings of despair within me all over again. But there was something different this time. Because you see, up until this moment, I had never in my life questioned whether or not I belonged in a space where people were fighting for social change. I came out the womb with my fist up. And I just knew there was no criteria beyond passion and heart, and that these values would guide my way. But suddenly I felt like not having studied the Webster Dictionary enough was going to compromise my ability to contribute to the conversation in a way that would actually allow me to be heard. And as I sat in my shame, I thought of all the friends and family who shape how I move about in the world, most of whom don't have degrees or what would be considered social capital. And I thought about Dominique. Because you see, Dominique spent a large portion of her adult life living in a shelter. And she doesn't have the time or capacity to debate the nuances of everyday language. And so I thought about how quickly she would laugh at me for overthinking whether or not I had offended somebody by misusing my little college word. And how she would proceed to give me examples of what offensive language actually sounds like. You want to hear offensive language? Beep, 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 beep. Now, I'm not saying this to say that language and behavior doesn't matter, because of course words mean things and actions do as well. But we have created a performance of social consciousness that is inherently classist in nature and does not honor the multiplicity of ways that we show up in this world. It's the reason we invest millions of dollars into feel-good statues and symbols instead of investing that money into BIPOC businesses that would actually cultivate agency. It's the reason why we write long, sterile think pieces analyzing the social issues of the day with no action steps to follow. It's the reason why we all know Rosa Parks, but most of us don't know Claudette Colvin, who was a pregnant teen who refused to give up her seat on the bus about 9 months before Rosa Parks did. But Claudette was a Dominique and therefore could not afford to be a hero. Now, Dominique hasn't done any of the traditional things to give back, but boy, does she have heart. She doesn't know nor care what a BIPOC is, but she loves being Black. She doesn't put BLM signs out on her window, but she did give me the shirt off of her back after just coming home from foster care, simply because she knew that I was cold and my Black life matters. She doesn't have access to capital that would allow her to navigate systems of power in ways that we would deem respectable or appropriate. But if someone she loves is being taken advantage of, you better believe she will find a way to give them a piece of her mind. And you don't want to be there when she does it. Dominique doesn't perform her social consciousness in the way that we're told it's supposed to look. And yet, in so many ways, she is the antithesis of white supremacy culture. We have to consider class. And when we live in a world that already finds so many ways to villainize people of lower classes, how do we truly claim to be equitable while leaving the Dominiques of the world behind? How do we claim to care about intersectionality and racial inequity when the main people of color that we invite to the table are the ones who are already working their way there? And in our quest to police language and behavior in the name of creating safe spaces, how do we ensure not to neglect the safety and validity of the people who have had the least amount of it to begin with? People who, by the way, we still call lower class because that's not language we've yet taken the time to truly reconsider. Now, the upper classes have always had a monopoly on good deeds and on how goodness is defined. But the movement for social consciousness, or woke culture as some people will call it, is not a debutante ball where one's wokeness is a tool that we weaponize to express our elitism in the name of performing good deeds. The movement for social consciousness requires that we understand how we all show up in this world, and that the ability to create change, or have the agency to create change, does not only belong to those who already have some semblance of power. We can't all afford the most environmentally friendly products. We don't all get the most health-conscious foods because the money just don't go as far. And in many cases, some of us have levels of trauma that would very easily translate into what would be considered problematic behavior. But do we not all have the ability to create change in our own unique way? Or would we also be too inappropriate for the sector? And what a shame that is, because creating change never required perfection. It doesn't even require that we not be problematic, or else none of us would be able to do anything. What it does require is that we be able to see people and connect with people beyond the performances that we've been told are worthy of validation. Now, the deeper I got into the DEI field, the more I found myself pulling away from the causes that I care about because of my own inability to keep up with the rules of the performance. And I got the degree. And at this point, I know it's not just me experiencing this disconnect. I've held consulting sessions where I've watched people silence themselves out of fear of saying the wrong thing. I've had peers confide to me about how overwhelmed they are by how this class's performance compromises our ability to be able to create a real change. And I even started to feel a sense of inner conflict, guilt even, for engaging with my friends and family who don't care about a lot of the things that I was learning was supposed to be important, because it doesn't resonate with their way of experiencing the world. And I was to internalize that they were problematic, despite the fact that I attended a college where people knew how to use all the right language. They knew how to be politically correct. And yet I met some of the most harmful people there that I ever have in my life. I was learning to view the people in my life through a new lens that would strip them of their humanity and force me to denounce a part of myself. The part of me in that mirror, cussing out that imaginary stranger who dared try to harm the girl who gave me the shirt off of her back when she had nothing. The part of me that is Dominique. I will never abandon the Dominiques of the world because they are too problematic, because their trauma is too big or too inconvenient, because they've learned to survive by leading with their fists instead of their words. Because truthfully, we're not only failing the Dominiques of the world, but we're robbing ourselves of an opportunity to learn firsthand how to dismantle this thing called white supremacy culture. Because we are forgetting and further penalizing the people who have been most crushed by its weight. The rules they've had to learn to survive look a lot different. They live on the outskirts of what we like to deem civilized and appropriate and respectable, but yet they are valid. Their experiences are valid, and from them we can learn so much. What if we engaged the Dominiques of the world, not with the aim of civilizing them or helping them, but learning from them? My relationship with Dominique allows me to see the gray in places where the world only sees black and white. And so as we consider who does and doesn't have social capital, let us remember that the Dominiques of the world are just as, if not more, crucial to this fight for social change as John, who owns the bank, or Keith, who works down at City Hall. Dominique has lived a life that exists beyond the confines of white validation. And within that, she is both limited and free. So if she doesn't get a seat at the table, if she is not good enough or worthy enough to fight for this cause, none of us are. Thank you.